You're listening to The Back 40, the podcast for Ontario farmers, covering topics and issues that matter most to Ontario agriculture. Brought to you by Trillium Mutual Insurance, bringing the ag community together one podcast at a time. I'm the host of The Back 40, Mike Brine, agribusiness specialist at Trillium Mutual Insurance. Welcome everyone to a special edition of The Back 40. We have reached the end of 2021 and it's been a very successful year for us here. This will be the 47th episode that we have put forth. We're going to go today and do a little bit of a retrospective on some of our favorite episodes that we've put up over the last year. Very pleased to be joined by a special guest. Tracy MacDonald is President and CEO of Trillium Mutual, and she is here with us today to talk about 2021 as it was. Tracy, welcome to the Back 40.
Thanks, Mike. Great to be here.
We talk about our podcast and how we started it, but the idea for this actually started with the executive committee and yourself at Trillium Mutual. Where did you come up with the idea for us doing a podcast?
Thanks, Mike. It goes back several years. Trillium Mutual has had a great partnership with the University of Guelph for a number of years, and they have a business program where we present business challenges to them, and they help us come up with ideas through the lens of that next generation. And a number of years ago, we gave them a business problem related to marketing, getting our name out there, and they talked to us about search engine optimization, about blog posts, and about podcasts. So that's going back a number of years. And then fast forward to 2020, 2021, when we were looking for different ways to sort of get our name out there and market a little bit. Our Vice President of Operations, Mike Verley, recalled this thought and said, you know what, maybe it's time that we look at things differently and try to educate in a little different way. And the idea for this podcast was born. We had a staff contest and we thought, what are we going to call this podcast? And we had our communications specialist come up with the name The Back 40, and it resonated really, really well. Then we handed it over to you, Mike, and the rest of the team, and you just made the magic happen and couldn't be happier with how things have turned out this year. There's been so many great stories.
Well, the Back 40 came to me about a year ago when Larry Holmes, who's my manager, came to the business development team and said, the executive team thinks that it would be a good idea if we tried to do a podcast. And I've always told people, you know, when the executive committee says, we think it's a good idea, you should do a podcast, what it really means is go do a podcast. I had never even listened to one. I had no idea what I was getting into. But for better or for worse, we picked myself as host. The other team members, Sam Videra, Ryan Nicholas, and Jeff Gerber, along with Larry, have all been working in the background to help make this a success. We finally landed on this as a format. Then we started wondering about when we should launch. And while we wanted to have 2 or 3 episodes already recorded before we started so that we didn't start and stop, Canada's Ag Day came up on the calendar, and we decided we wanted to be sure and get launched before that because we had Marty Seymour from FCC, who is instrumental in getting Canada's Ag Day up and running. We had a podcast with him, and it was going to be too late if we didn't get that one up before February 22nd. So we looked around for guests, and we landed with Kelly Daynard as our first guest. Kelly is from Farm and Food Care, Ontario. I knew it was going to be a great experience when we were just a few minutes in, and we got an absolutely fabulous quote from her. And she talked about farmers and people not really understanding them, and she described them in a rather unique way.
You know, I often tell farmers that I meet in meetings or when I do speaking engagements that they're a bit like leprechauns or unicorns. People really want to believe that they exist, but they don't know where they are. And they can be a bit of a mythical creature for somebody who lives in downtown London or Ottawa or Toronto. We've got an increasing disconnect just for the way that our world has gone. You know, we've got so many less less farms now than we did generations ago. Farming is a really tough way to make a living, and people have moved into town in increasing numbers. So, my family, the majority still are farm connected, but we're an increasingly rare breed of people. And I know a lot of my urban friends, they don't know how many generations now they're removed from their farming ancestors. They don't have any concept of where they would have been.
Education is one thing, but educating through the stories of people's firsthand experiences really just resonate in an entirely different way. And I think that's one of the magical things about a podcast. You don't have to be sitting doing nothing but reading a book. You can be out working the fields or driving somewhere to and from, and you could be listening to these stories, and different things are going to resonate for different people. And I've really found that listening to the podcast, I really look forward to every Tuesday when a new one drops. My thing is walking the dog while I'm listening to somebody telling their story. And I've learned something new and interesting, and sort of just reinvigorated that passion for agriculture inside of me. First 20 years of my life grew up on a farm. So it just brought back so many memories, and then just the growth and the development of the entire industry and where it's heading into the future. There's been just great experiences, and just reinvigorating, like I said, that passion. And that's been a bit of an unintended benefit of this podcast, not just for me, but for everybody in Trillium, in insurance, in farm insurance. It's just really been an opportunity to tell the stories and create this platform for our audience. It's been a wonderful experience versus just, sitting in a classroom and listening to education. Storytelling is such a wonderful way to educate.
One of the keys to the way that we do the podcast is it's really important that we get people who have great stories to tell, and then let them tell them in the best way possible. We've spent a fair amount of time talking about how do we go about getting our message out to the rest of agriculture. We've had several different guests that have talked about that. All of them have been really engaging and have had really good insights into that. Crystal Mackay is one of those people that is really dedicated to telling the story. I found that she was very engaging, had a really different way of looking at how do we get our story out to people, that it was more about trust than it was about us giving the facts and figures.
Absolutely, Mike. I think that trust comes with understanding that there's real people behind food production, and it doesn't just magically appear in the grocery store. So I think telling these stories and trying to get that message out is something that we can do with this platform, and it really resonates with people to feed our country.
There's a huge difference in level of trust and credibility between a farmer as an individual, and even the associations that represent farmers, and then definitely the food system as a whole. The warmth and positive trust and credibility people have in farmers are around words like hardworking, dedicated, multi-generational. There's a lot of warmth around that. It also has a picture of Old MacDonald beside it. Then when we use a picture of the food system or modern agriculture, then you have this large, faceless, corporate-owned, maybe somebody in a suit in another country, and it's very far from the truth. I always say, would the real farmer please stand up? So what we need to do when we're telling our farm story, and we've been working really hard at it in the last few years, is take Old MacDonald's children. They've gone to school. Now they're home running the farm. So we need to introduce new MacDonald's basically to the public and have a conversation to say, you know what, I'm fifth generation, I'm third generation, or I'm first generation on the farm, but I still farm with the same care and commitment that my great-grandparents did. But now I use GPS and modern technology to do it. I think the key is we're not going to educate our way out of this gap between people that grow our food and the people who eat it. We can't educate everyone about the food system and every aspect of it. What we can do is work to ensure that there is trust in the food system and the people who grow our food. So it's definitely a shift. I've been working in this space for a long time. My first efforts at educating the public was bringing 5 different breeds of dairy cows to a local fair so people could know the difference between a Jersey and a Guernsey and a Holstein. I felt that was very important at the time. Now it's like, okay, let's go right back to this is a dairy cow. This is where milk comes from. She's different than an Angus. It's a very different place. The point is, the value of it is viewing it differently, that we're not trying to educate the public about every aspect of the food system, but we are trying to have a conversation with them with the goal to earn trust. I definitely see it as a shift to recognizing it as a business risk. If we don't have the trust of the public, we don't have permission to grow and innovate and continue to do the things that we need to do to feed our country.
When we first started trying to find guests for the program, we were really worried that we were going to run out of people. And it was really hard at sometimes to find somebody and think of somebody that had a really great story to tell. But it got easier as we went along. There was a lot of suggestions. Some came from the staff at Trillium. We had several from yourself as well, Tracy, where you suggested different people. But we found that they came from the oddest sources sometimes, and sometimes we just stumbled across the person that we'd never ever thought of.
It kind of go in trends, and you'd sort of get into a theme, and a few would sort of be grouped together with a specific theme because there was a lot of interest in a particular topic. Myself as well, like I would hear about things in the community, great things people were doing and that had a story to tell. So it was awesome to be able to share that because I knew we had a platform and we wanted to get those stories out there.
On several different episodes, we talked about farm succession. We had the Johnson brothers on, and they talked about moving from one generation to the other. We had Elaine Fraser, who's a professional coach for people, and she talked about how you go about with that communication. But when we talk about where the guests come from, one of the most riveting guests that we had was Maggie Van Camp. And the suggestion for her actually came from Crystal Mackay. And she said she would be great to talk about farm succession. Her expertise on this comes from the fact that she's been through a farm succession where her husband was killed in a farming accident. And we talked a lot about what her personal experience was with that. To me, it was one of the most riveting conversations I think we've had on the Back 40.
Seeing it through Maggie's eyes, and certainly succession is a big challenge for many today, and listening to her story and applying some key concepts and some practical things people can do to sort of get ready for that conversation, and the communication that she talked about as being such a key and integral part of preparing for succession, even if it's 20 years down the road, really resonated with me. And having her individual story start that one off was really a great way to get that conversation going and resonate with so many people.
It basically gave me, all of us actually, because it was destroyed, not only myself, but his family as well. Like, it was just heart-wrenching. We had time and we had choices because we had done this ahead of time. Everybody knew what the pathway was, and that communication was clear up front. We also learned how to communicate in the process of succession planning. So we sat down at a table and discussed the 4Ds, which was very hard to do. In retrospect, thank God we did that. Thank God everyone knew what we were supposed to do.
So as far as the succession plan goes, what did you find that you did really, really well with that plan that you had in place?
We all met with the same lawyer. We had the same lawyer. It was very clear what we were to do when. I think so that part was really good. Another thing that we did, and it was just because of my job with Country Guide at the time, I had interviewed Jolene Brown. She's an Idaho farmer and a really dynamic speaker. And she talked about writing down a continuity plan for their farm. So she locked her husband in the pickup truck, which I did, and just asked questions. So what would you like? Where are the keys? What's the passwords? Who are our financial players? Where's the list of deeds? These kind of things that are very practical to continuity. Okay, I did that with my husband. So that helped. I had kind of a list of his wishes, which was very helpful. But also on our farm, we were lucky because we had split management. So I managed the chickens. My brother-in-law and sister-in-law managed the dairy, and my husband did the cropping. I was lucky that I knew the feed dealer, so I knew who to talk to. I mean, I did chores the day he died because I just needed that continuity. I say I raised salted chickens that crop because I cried every time I went to the barn, but it gave me that place to do it, Mike, and that consistency and control when everything seemed out of control.
You carried on with the farm. Did you ever have a time when you thought that I just can't do this anymore?
Every day. Every day. It was our dream. Like, it wasn't just my husband's dream, this farm. So that helped a great deal. But I totally understand if a woman wants to sell a farm after her husband passes away. Oh my goodness. Yes. It's just, tough if you're forced to sell. If you don't have any plans and you don't have things written down and you don't have, say, an insurance policy to help or backdrop positions, then it doesn't give you the choice to sell or not to sell. And I think that's when it's really, really difficult for farm families to navigate through.
I think the most interesting thing about this conversation was that we were having a bit of problems with the internet that day. We record all of these on Zoom, and in order to save bandwidth, we'd shut cameras off. And when she talked about the salty chickens, that was a time where I was really glad that she carried on, because I'm not sure I could have done so. It really was a powerful statement, really, really affected me. Certainly, I was glad at that point that the camera was off.
Storytelling just draws out such emotion for sure, and just helps the story resonate and the message come across.
One of the keys to this is the passion that our various guests have. I think every one of them has that story to tell. Oftentimes, when you are looking at that story and you're talking to them, you'll hear that passion in their voice, particularly the passion that they have when they start talking about how they communicate with other people and how they get their message across. And some of them are really, really good at making sure that everybody understands what their message is by appealing to that emotional part of people.
I think that's what resonated for me so many times in listening to so many stories, that while farming and agriculture is certainly a business, it's certainly an industry, it's just a way of life. And it's a lifestyle that no one is willing to give up no matter what. And so when you intertwine life with business so much, there's no other choice but for passion to really come through.
We talked to Amy Peck, and Amy was integral in the production of a short film called Guardians of the Grasslands. And that episode, we talked about that film, and it talks about the grasslands in Alberta being one of the most endangered environmental areas in North America. She talked about how cattle are very important to making sure that those grasslands are maintained. A lot of people will look at cattle, and we hear it all the time, they produce way too much carbon footprint. We should all stop eating beef. But she brought forth the idea that cattle are actually part of the solution out there, and without them, these grasslands would disappear.
Yeah, it was just an excellent eye-opening podcast that really talked about how cattle have such a role to play in, being stewards of the land and, the fighting the climate issues that we have today and preserving such an important part of Canada's natural landscape.
I think the best part, though, is when she talked about the film, and she talked about how when farmers see it, you get to the end and there's a lady on there that talks about how if we don't do something, these grasslands are going to disappear. And she's very emotional about that. Farmers see the film and they look at it and they say, I'm not really that comfortable when she starts talking about the emotion of losing this. And yet, Amy talked about how they're not really the market for the film. The film is meant for people that are not part of the farming community. Mm-hmm. And those are the people that loved it.
So Guardians of the Grasslands is a short documentary, and it explores the vital role that cattle play in preserving one of the most endangered ecosystems, our native temperate grasslands. We're really hoping that it opens people's minds up to the idea that cattle could be beneficial for an ecosystem. Maybe not so much in producer circles, but definitely with urban media, we've seen that cattle are not good for the environment. And I think a lot of producers know that there is definitely another side of this story where not only are cattle working to the benefit of an ecosystem, but actually vital to the preservation of that ecosystem itself. Really, the intended audience is not producers, right? It is this urban market. And so when we tested the film, they loved it. And you say, what did you like most about it? They went, at the end, she gets so heartfelt. She gets so passionate about it. And it really resonated with me. So who are you trying to create this for? Is it this outside audience that, you can't just present the facts. You have to tell the story. Mackenzie, Ducks Unlimited Canada at the end, she brings that passion that she feels for grasslands and her hope that we can keep what's left intact. People remember that portion of the film. And the next time they see cattle grazing in a field, the next time they go to purchase beef at the grocery store, that's what they remember. And I hope it really speaks to a new direction of agriculture communications, that we can't be afraid to get to the heart of the story. People want to know the why, and we've got to be able to go there.
Do you like what you're hearing from the Back 40? We'd like to hear from you. Send us an email with your comments and thoughts to theback40@trilliummutual.com or follow us on social media @Trillium Mutual. We've had a wide variety of guests. We've had people all the way from the Maritimes out to BC, in the prairies, and of course in Ontario as well. But I think the most fun conversation I had was with Stephanie Berkeley. And Stephanie was from Stratford on Avon. It was amazing to be able to speak to somebody that was that far away, that really had something to tell us and a story to tell that was interesting to all of our listeners.
There's several silver linings within the pandemic, and I think this is one of them. Probably prior to 2020, we would never have considered a podcast with guests from all over the world. So this was great, and is actually somebody that I reached out to through our Global Association of International Cooperative and Mutual Insurance Companies, and they connected us with Stephanie because I was looking for somebody to speak on farm safety and get perspectives from around the world. So it was an awesome conversation, a lot of fun to listen to, Mike.
We recorded that one on March 18th, so the day after St. Patrick's Day, and Stephanie is Irish. So we had a lot of fun with talking, hey, we should have done this on the 17th. And I said, yeah, maybe not. Maybe that wouldn't have been the best time to have done this. But Stephanie talked about farm safety, and the very things that she talked about that were problems in the UK are problems here and continue to be problems here. And the education component of what her foundation brings to the farmers in the UK is something that's really special and something I don't think that we see in the same format here as what they're doing there.
Amazing. And we've learned a lot even from our mutual counterparts around the world as well. And I know Stephanie's working for an organization called NFU Mutual in the UK. And we've learned a lot from that organization and been able to bring it back here to how we develop product and service.
It's that human aspect where you disappear suddenly inside your brain going, wow, these are the consequences for me. These are the consequences for my business if this guy does this job and it's unsafe. That's the approach that we take. It's not don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. It's giving them the skills to be able to live well and to farm well. And that's what we're trying to do.
Talked about my father getting wound up in a power takeoff. He took a shortcut that he knew he shouldn't do, and he had spoken so many times, and it was so front of mind with him, and yet he did it anyway. It just shows that if someone like him could and would do that, it's something that needs to be brought forward and kept there.
This is the thing that we're trying to sort of embed in the next generation, that they're going to do this each and every day for the rest of their working lives. And let's be honest, what farmer retires at 65 years of age? At the end of the day, if they're going to do this as their job, they want to do it each and every day. They want to come home with 5 fingers, 5 toes, 2 arms, 2 legs. That's not a lofty ambition, really, let's be honest. Really make sure that they're thinking of this every day and doing those little dynamic risk assessments in their head, taking a quick look around the farmyard to see what has changed since yesterday, not presuming that everything's going to be the same. And that's what we're trying to do. Is we're trying to debunk the myths around things like risk assessments. Basically, you get up in the morning, you make yourself a cup of tea, you don't lift it straight up to your mouth to take a drink because you know it's going to be too hot and it's going to burn your mouth. That's a risk assessment. This is the kind of thing, if your kid's got Lego on the ground, you're not going to walk through it because that's worse than walking through fire. That's a risk assessment. And you do them all the time. So why should it be any different for farming? I can't make you do it. It has to be your decision, but do it for the right reason. To come home and be able to go out with your friends and to be able to cut your own steak.
So, Mike, I'm just interested, how do you prepare for these conversations that you're having with people? I'm assuming a lot of these people you've never met before. So how does it work when you first set up these chats?
It's interesting. Some of the people I do know, and I have a relationship with them. I actually interviewed Russ Barker, who's my neighbor, but many of the others I've never spoken to. And in some cases, I'm not that familiar with what it is that they're doing. I've heard a little bit about it, and it sounds like a great topic, but I need to dive into it a little bit more. We always do a half an hour to an hour chat before we try and do the podcast. And we try and do that within a week of when we do the podcast recording. Then I'll go away and I'll set out a kind of a roadmap for where we want the conversation to go based on what I've been able to find out from talking to them. There's several different reasons for it. One, obviously, so that we know enough to be able to ask the questions for them to tell the story as it goes. The other is, though, we want to build a little bit of a rapport before we start so that we're not coming in and really having to introduce ourselves. We already kind of know each other. And it really does help put people at ease when we go to record this. We edit these. So if something comes out that isn't quite the way people want it to, we'll just edit that part out and start again. But that pre-call is really key to being able to produce a good podcast at the end of the day.
I'm sure you've learned along the way.
It's great to get to know these people. It's great to be able to talk to them ahead of time. And sometimes the conversations afterwards are just as good. One of the people that we talked to was Jackie Fraser from Fraser's Foods in Fergus. And we had a great conversation on the pre-call. She talked about how the pandemic had affected her business. And she wasn't the first person to mention that business actually had picked up through the pandemic, but she maybe described it better than anybody else that we had on.
I've known Jackie for quite a while because she serves on our Roots Council. And I never knew the story about her business, so it was fantastic. So one of our main motivations with Roots is to give back to the communities in which we serve and to help preserve rural communities across Ontario. And so Jackie's been instrumental in helping deliver funds back on behalf of Trillium Mutual. And listening to her story about her business was absolutely fantastic for me.
It was unbelievable. Yeah, I remember when this was going to be a 2-week thing. Oh my goodness. In the beginning, it was breakfast items. So all of a sudden, everybody was eating breakfast at home. Nobody ate breakfast at home. You got breakfast on the way to the office. So it was bananas, eggs, like you say, dairy, yogurt, all those breakfast items. I thought, what is going on? We would sell 4 cases of bananas a week in pre-pandemic, and we were selling 20 cases, buying eggs from everybody we could find to try and keep eggs on the shelf. And then the pandemic baking craze began. So flour, we couldn't keep flour on the shelf. It was whack-a-mole. You were just racing around trying to get product on the shelves.
So with challenges comes opportunities. Would you say it's been a good year or two since then?
100%. We have learned so much. We have gained so much. We have an online shop now, as well as we offer delivery through a third-party delivery agent. So those are things we did not do pre-pandemic. So now all those things are in place. We still have some people using the curbside because now they find it convenient. That's good. We still have the online shop. But of course, at the end of the day, we still want bodies in our store. I mean, again, back to the whole reason why we're here is, to create that fun shopping experience where we have interaction and all that. We don't want to lose that. So we are really happy to have people back in the store. But, throughout the pandemic, it was important to have those things in place, and we're set up in case there's ever another one, I guess. I joke that I'm going to write a book someday, how a pandemic saved my business, and it really did.
So one of the biggest challenges that we find in the industry is just really getting young people interested sort of to take over for the older generation. The average age of farmers is 58. And so it was really exciting for us to talk to the outstanding young farmers and really love the story of the little brown cow and how they had a viral video go on TikTok and what that did for their business, and just really thought that resonated with that next generation and everything that is possible. And you just really never know. It's the time and place.
Yeah, we had a few different guests on that would classify as young farmers. Certainly the industry has struggled for many years about trying to get young people involved and how do you run their own business. The Outstanding Young Farmers of Ontario it's a terrific organization. We spoke to Amy Cronin about how the organization runs. But I'm with you. I think the most riveting was talking to Jenny Butcher and Wes Kuntz from Little Brown Cow. They talked about how they had been successful, how they're taking the entire production from their herd of jerseys and selling it through their own store. That story about the viral video, that was one that was, I think, a highlight of what we heard on the Back 40 this year.
We were running the store, and out of nowhere, the phone calls kept flooding in, and they were all from people that you could tell on the phone were of East Asian descent. This is at 3:00 on a Friday at the end of March. And finally, I walked out to one of them and I asked them, I said, what's going on? And they laughed and laughed and laughed, and they showed me a TikTok video. And it was a simple TikTok video, and it was a man speaking in Punjabi, saying good milk, very good milk, really good milk, very good milk. And that's all. We watched the video. It was not a sexy video. It simply scanned the milk and then spanned the little brown cow sign. It didn't even say where we lived or anything. On Friday, we had 150 phone calls. We didn't know what to expect for Saturday morning. We had reasoned to ourselves that, in fact, they live far away. They're just interested. They're not actually coming. They won't find us. And on Saturday, we had 400 phone calls. Our first customer that morning bought 40 liters of milk, and he looked at me and he said, "You are going to be seeing a lot of brown people today." Dead serious. And he just laughed and laughed and laughed as he brought all his milk out the door. Maybe 1,000.
Yeah.
Maybe 1,000 people, mostly from Brampton, but they came from Clarington, Barrie,
Windsor,
Niagara.
Wow.
Toronto, downtown Toronto, London. It was a roll call of Ontario.
Had some phone calls from Calgary.
Many phone calls asking where our franchise is in Calgary. Yeah. How many farms we have in Calgary.
When did you decide you were going to need more milk?
Like 2 hours into Saturday. We had run out of milk before noon on Saturday. And that day, there were literally hundreds of people from Brampton on our lawn. And I said, well, gosh, they've driven so far. I don't know, why don't we go milk the cows? So we did. At 1:00, we went out, milked the cows while they all waited. We pasteurized the milk while they all waited, and they waited so patiently. It only gave us 350 liters more milk because we had milked so early. That was all sold within half an hour.
Yeah, we've had so many important and topical topics on the Back 40, Mike, and really looking at a broad spectrum, everything from what's current, what's in the news, what's happening in the pandemic, what are entrepreneurs trying to do to solve our current problems. I know we recently had somebody on to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, we were talking to Dr. Jeff Wichtal and Dr. Kate Dewey. They're veterinarians with the Ontario Vet College in Guelph. They're instrumental in starting a new program there called One Health. And the idea behind it is that they approach every problem from a lot of different disciplines, and they get as many people involved in it as they can. Part of the reason being that we all look at just a little piece of the puzzle, whereas if you get everybody together and everybody looks at this, you get different perspectives, which comes up with a lot of different ideas for solving these problems. They started this just before the pandemic, and yet what we found throughout COVID-19 is that we can't just look at it from one perspective. We have a whole lot of different things that we have to look at. I think the best part about this conversation that we're about to hear is that it didn't happen while we were recording the podcast itself. Some of the best conversations that I have are actually after I say, okay, that's great, we've got that. And this is one of those that took place after we'd already finished recording the podcast.
We've been talking about One Health for 30 years, and suddenly everybody else is talking about it. What happened to me when I came here as dean was, I'd been sort of quietly trying to work, as Kate has, on One Health for my entire career. And suddenly I've got the president and the vice president researcher breathing down my neck saying, why aren't you doing more One Health? It was just a real sea change all of a sudden. So it's funny how things change. Everything has its moment, right? And I think One Health is having a moment right now. People's frustration, for instance, in how little progress we're making on climate change or on fighting antimicrobial resistance, the ineffectiveness of international aid, and even the poor effectiveness of solving health issues in our own country, like in the North and in Indigenous communities. There's just a high degree of frustration that we've been so unsuccessful in so many ways, and that there must be a different approach. And so One Health seems to be having its moment right now.
So, Mike, you said we've done 47 episodes of storytelling. Is there any one in particular that really stands out or resonated in some way with you?
There's been several. We've had a lot of really good guests, but one of the ones I think that stands out the most for me is the story that we did on Hay West 2.0 with Martin Ritzma. That was one that almost came by accident. My wife saw an article that Martin was organizing a lift of hay out to Western Canada because they've been so badly affected by drought out there. She's known Martin for a long time. I've known Martin for a long time. He was a teacher in Stratford and taught with my wife at Stratford Central. It's one of the ones, because it was timely, it was really amazing at how quickly we could turn this around. Many times we're talking 3 weeks from the time we record and maybe longer before we actually post an episode. This one we wanted to get up right away. I talked to Martin just a couple of days ago and got an update on that. And he said that they've had 1,000 large bales donated and 500 of them are already out west. There's another 500 to go. The bottleneck that they're finding is they're having difficulties finding empty trailers that are heading to Western Canada. Many of the trucking companies already have their trailers full. They like to have them full going both ways. So that's been a bit of a bottleneck, but he's working through it. One of the things that he did ask was that I put it out again, that anyone that wants to help with Hay West 2.0, this is an ongoing thing. As he says, it's a marathon, not a sprint. If you have more good hay that you're willing to donate, that would be terrific. If you happen to know of someone that has a truck, a transport truck that's going out there that could take some hay, he'd be interested in that as well.
What an awesome way to use this platform. I know it certainly was a story that resonated with me, and it's that whole piece around farmers helping farmers, and they don't have to be in our backyard, but I think everybody could really put your head into that and understand the challenge and the suffering that was really going on through the climate problems out west this year. So it was a great story to tell, and certainly resonated with me.
And if you want to donate hay, or you want to, as I said, with the transport, you can email him at martinritzma@gmail.com, or you can text him on his cell phone, 519-276-9659. One of the things that I asked Martin was why he does what he does. And like I said, I've known Martin for a long time, and I've known the backstory, and it is one of the most powerful reasons that anyone could have for giving back to the community.
I'm going to go. I'm in tears here. I'm going to go back to my first one, and that's, we have ALS in our family. My mom and 5 siblings have died of ALS, and my brother, Ralph, at that time in 2002, was very sick with ALS and died in early August. And I made a commitment to him and my other siblings. They died at a very young age. If you can't do it, and I know you would be the first in line to do it, I'm going to do it. I'm going to carry your share as well. So, that's part of it from an emotional side. The other side of it, I've been in agriculture all my life, born and raised on a dairy farm, saw the good times and the blessings, but also lived through some pretty tough times. To that end, being taken in by a large beef producer in this area that, I saw exactly where those beef animals came from and the quality of the animals, and learned to respect what the farmers, a big part across our country, were bringing to the table here in southwestern Ontario. When you have the capacity to serve and to make a difference, whether it's Hay West or anything else in your local and or global community, I think it's imperative that you take that opportunity and do it. I can make a difference. If I can instill in somebody else the belief, the trust that if they donate dollars or hay, it is going to be used wisely, spent wisely, donated wisely. And, I make the promise that we'll do our very, very best to see what you donate goes to those men and women that are in need out west.
So, Tracy, what's your favorite episode out of all the ones that we've done?
Favorite's a tough word. I've learned something from every single one of the episodes. The one that absolutely tugged at my heartstrings the most, and I'm not the most emotional person, so it takes a bit to get emotion out of me, but listening to Jen Fennings from Fennings Organic Farm just really brought so many things together for me when she talked about the migrant workers, and she had a clip that we'll play And it really just brought together sort of everything we're struggling with in the world right now, and the fact that we can do better. And hopefully Jen telling her story really resonated with a lot of our audience, that the fact that absolutely we can all do better, because the privileges that we were born with, just because of where you were born makes things different. So I think her story probably resonated the most with me. And just like raising the salty chickens, I absolutely had to come home and really reflect on the story that Jen told that day.
It was well told. It almost didn't happen, because when I phoned up on our pre-call to talk about what it was we wanted to talk about, I thought we were going to talk about her organic vegetable farm that they've been very successful with. And at the time, you couldn't talk about that without talking about the migrant workers. And as soon as the topic came up, like, she just lit up. After about 5 minutes of talking about it, I said, "Do you want to do the episode on migrant workers?" She said, "Can we?" I said, "Well, yeah, we can do whatever we want, as long as it's an episode that people are interested in listening to. We're not limited by what we talk about." And I'm really glad I did, because as you said, the whole topic was really well done. She's so passionate about that. She's so passionate about the plight of the migrant workers. And as you say, that clip, that's one of the most powerful ones I think that we've had on the entire Back 40.
Yeah, it certainly resonated with me.
What we need to do is fully reimagine and rewrite everything about how we bring people, their workers second, their people first. So we have to reimagine how people are entering our country to do work that is absolutely essential to providing food that we grow here. And when we look at it through that lens, and you look at the program the way it's written, we have to completely change everything about it from the ground up. When we think about them as human beings who have wishes and desires and needs for companionship and love and family and children, and we look at the negative impact that taking parents away from their children for so much of their lives has on the countries that they come from. We talk about the issues here. I could spend a whole other podcast talking about the negative impacts to communities in these places where so many of the adults are leaving to find employment elsewhere. But if we look at it from the Canadian lens, if we truly believe that we are a country that values people and treats people fairly, then we should allow these people to bring their families and fully partake in Canadian life. Their children should be allowed to go to our schools. Their families should be allowed to share this community. I think we have some really phenomenal communities in Canada. I really love my community, and I would be happy to share it with each and every one of my workers on a permanent basis with their families. I would be delighted to see their children offered the opportunities that my children were offered. I grew up being told by my father, don't ever judge somebody for what they may have in life or what opportunities. You didn't do anything special to be born to this family in this country with all of the privileges that you were born with. And that is really a foundational principle for me in how I view the world. We are fortunate, we're privileged. That doesn't mean I've never suffered, but there are a lot of ways that I have been privileged. And we need to not just continue with that. We need to make sure that we are extending that privilege to people who are absolutely vital to maintaining the privilege we have.
That would be a fundamental change that would really change both the labor market, the migrant workers. That would be a fundamental change to how we do business, wouldn't it?
It would. But wouldn't that be wonderful?
So Tracy, that's our best 10 clips that we feel that we've got from 2021. It has been a very successful year. We certainly want to thank all of our listeners, people that have made this so successful. Just to put it in perspective, we do track how many people listen to our podcast. And if you add up all of the 47 episodes that we've got, we have over 400,000 listens. And that averages out to over 9,000 listens per week. It's been successful far beyond what I think we ever expected it would be. Just want to remind everybody that starting in 2022, our podcast will be going to one episode every second week. It does take a fair amount of time to put this together, and we do want to put out a great product. So we've made the decision that we will be going to one episode every second week. Still going to have great guests. We have some great ideas lined up for people that will join our program.
Absolutely, Mike. And from just a nugget of an idea and where this has gone, just want to thank everyone who's taken the time to be a guest and for everyone for listening in. It's really gone beyond our imagination where we could take this, and hopefully we're doing a little bit of good along the way. So just want to wish everyone a very happy new year as we enter into 2022. Really, really hopeful for much success, joy and peace ahead.
Thanks very much for joining me today, Tracy. On behalf of all of us at Trillium Mutual and the Back 40, wishing everybody a happy holidays and all the best in 2022. With the pandemic and the closure of farmers markets, many farmers have chosen to go online to reach their customers. Join us next time when we're talking to Cole Jones from Local Line about the platform that these farmers are using to put their business online. That's next time on the Back 40.
You've been listening to The Back 40, brought to you by Trillium Mutual Insurance. Be sure to subscribe to The Back 40 wherever you find your favorite podcasts so that you don't miss an episode. The Back 40, bringing the ag community together one podcast at a time. I'm Mike Brine. Until next time, take care and stay safe.